Yasher Koach. Zachary and Levi, wow. Truly, Yasher Koach, you've done a wonderful job here this morning. And you have both raised and explored important questions in our double Torah portion, Bahar Bechukotai. Zachary, you thoughtfully explored this question about why God is so concerned with the idea of rest. Rest for our bodies, rest for our land, rest for workers and our children and our animals. And you urged us to think carefully about the ways that we tend to work ourselves and the land into utter exhaustion, suggesting that that is not the life that God wants for us. And Levi, you insightfully noticed that the litany of terrible things and punishments outlined in Bahar Bechukotai seem to far outnumber and outweigh the list of good and hopeful things that might come to us, suggesting that it's pretty important that we find ways to amplify the good so that we don't find ourselves drowning in the overwhelming negative. I believe that your two insights this morning speak directly and with wisdom to this time that we're living through. Zachary, it has felt for many just existentially exhausting to try to understand and respond to the intentional overload of news items coming out of our administration and across the world. And Levi, it can certainly feel right now that the ledger of all the bad news and the painful things that are happening outnumber and outweigh the good. Earlier just this week, there was a horrific anti-Semitic attack on Sarah Milgram and Yaron Lashinsky outside a Jewish event in D.C. These two young lives were taken, apparently because the gunman assumed that they were Jews, and he said he did this for Gaza. Sarah was, in fact, though, a peacemaker, a bridge builder between Israelis and Palestinians. And now we're hearing some voices not only downplaying these murders, but daring to try to justify them, this hateful and existentially destructive action. This is a very heavy darkness for us to hold on the negative side of the scale. And there are still 58 hostages being held captive, tortured and starved in Gaza now for 596 days. And there are just massive numbers of Gazan children and innocent civilians experiencing starvation and crippling malnutrition every day. And in this country, there are destructive executive orders and legislation being passed that will have devastating consequences for elders, the sick, the poor, children, the planet, and democracy as a whole. And Kilmar Abrego Garcia and hundreds of others who have been kidnapped to El Salvador and now also South Sudan are still there. And so much more that we could point to are terrible verses multiplied and so heavy on the scales and heavy on our hearts. Given such an outsized distribution of the negative, it would be possible for us to believe that the future can only unfold from here on a trajectory towards an inevitably darker horizon. It would be possible to let the cruelty of the negative verses crush us, exhausting our bodies and our hearts beyond recovery. But I want to suggest that we need to find a way to not condemn ourselves to living only there, in that dark place of overwhelm. And given your teachings today, I suspect that the two of you might agree with that. So I want to share a perspective on this Torah portion that I think can be a helpful lens right now. Not because the long list of negative things aren't real and in need of our attention and condemnation and our mourning and our weeping, but because we need a way to think about this world, to live in it, and to remember that no matter what is happening now, that the future is not yet written and that we are writing it. So we find in these parshiyot that God says to Moses, Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of Adonai. Sheish shanim tizra sadecha, v'sheish shanim tizmor karmecha, v'asafta et tevuata. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest. Okay, so this is the law of the Shemitah year, that when the people arrive in the land, they will be required to let their fields and their vineyards lie fallow every 7th year. So a contemporary rabbi, Rabbi Andy Gordon, recently pointed out something kind of amazing about this verse. While this text seems to merely lay out an agricultural law, imagine, he tells us, the shock that the people must have felt in this moment to learn that they would one day be farmers. Consider this. The people hear these words while they're still standing at the foot of Mount Sinai. Just a little while back, they were still slaves in Mitzrayim. But upon hearing these words, certainly one of them must have interrupted and cried out, "Hang on. What do you mean, Sadcha, your field? What do you mean, Karmecha, your vineyard?" My field? My vineyard? We'll be farmers one day? We'll have land, a place to call home, and grow our own food? No more relying on this miracle of manna falling from the sky to feed us? No more wandering? Things turn out okay in this future? That's just wild. To have a picture painted for their future that would have seemed completely impossible from their current angle. Look at us now, lost, unkempt, exhausted, afraid, vulnerable, they might have said. But you're telling us that there's a future where we have overcome these things, where we're settled and okay, and even have enough to share with the hungry from our land? And that is the magic of Bahar Bechukotai. A reminder that there can be a future that we haven't even yet begun to imagine, but which is good and peaceful and restful and compassionate and abundant in blessing for all people. A future that we would be proud to hand down to our children and our children's children, that is yet available to us. And so our ancestors, some chapters from now, they'll set out on their journey on a trajectory towards an entirely different horizon than the one that they could imagine before this was articulated to them. And of course they have their doubts, because they are human. And so they ask God, but what are we supposed to eat in the 7th year if we can't work our fields? They are understandably cynical that this vision would come to fruition at all. It seems pretty unlikely, actually. And maybe we can empathize with that. But the commentator Ha'amek Davar notes on this verse, in truth, all this is nothing but miraculous. That in a year without any planting, the grain, the fruit of the trees, it'll all grow enough to satiate the entire population of people and animals. And if we read into his comment, we might hear him saying, this is not just miraculous, but it's a little naive, no? To believe that we might go from being former slave nomads to living in a land of abundance. But he continues, in Jewish tradition, it is known that believing in a path of miracles is only appropriate to the extent that one prepares for it. He's drawing here on a rabbinic tradition that teaches, do not expect a miracle. Don't wait for a miracle. And Ha'amak Davar adds, rather, prepare for them, plan for them, in fact, desire them, articulate them, strategize them, find partners for them, workshop them, and then build for them. participate in manifesting them. At CBE, we are engaged in the very beginning of a futuring process in which we as a congregation will dream up together a horizon or multiple horizons that are the futures that we really want and would be proud to hand down to our children's children, honestly, proud to hand down to you and all that come after you. And yes, this work, all of this imagining work, it is harder than we ever thought that it would be, but we're slowly figuring out how to articulate a world where the scales are not quite so heavy on the negative side. And in fact, where rest for our bodies and our lands, it's not some idealistic fantasy, but it's real and it's attainable, not by magic, but because we have prepared for it. A couple of weeks ago, we beta tested what we called an imagination session with some parents from our preschool. And after expounding on some very beautiful visions for a more desirable future, one of the parents understandably said, "I just don't understand how we could possibly get there, given where we are now." But then another parent responded, "I think maybe it starts with this conversation that we're having right here." And I think she's right. You know, the Talmud teaches that Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come. So today, right now, it's meant to be a taste of the future that we would want, a taste of rest and being in community and treating each other with kindness and living with the joy of two young people teaching us Torah and families celebrating together with so many differences in this room. Because just a taste of it makes us want more of it and gives us a template for expanding on it. It reminds us that if we want a hopeful world, a healed world, a generous world, a peaceful future for this world, we could start dreaming it up as soon as today. And dreaming it up gets us closer to making it real. Because in that same sugya that teaches that Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come, it also teaches that dreams are 1/60th of prophecy. That if we can dream up a better world, if we can speak it into existence, what we want, that is 1/60th of making that world a reality. We cannot journey towards something we can't imagine, but if we say it out loud, we are already on our way towards it. Our ancestors spent a great deal of time in imagination. They imagined the Shemitah year, where they went from being lost to being home. They dreamt up a land of milk and honey to wander towards. The prophet Micah dreamt up a future in which every person would sit under their own vine and fig tree with none to make them afraid. And the prophet Isaiah imagined a world in which the nations will beat their swords into plowshares and study war no more. They were bold, even as they were living through exiles and attacks and suffering. They gazed at a horizon and they said what they wanted and how we would have to act in order to get there. I believe that we need this agreement that the future is not inevitable, that our current present is not an immutable harbinger of doom, and that we can disrupt hate and injustice and change our trajectory. It will take all of us from across the world and across the political spectrum. It will take the two of you, Levi and Zachary, to dream up a world where the verses on the scales of good far outweigh the negative. We are so proud of all that you taught us today, and we so look forward to the future that you will both help all of us to write. Yasher Koach and Shabbat Shalom.